Let's have a look at India's foreign policy in today's highly disrupted and divided world with no clear global leadership, no clear vision, with alliances and partnerships are under unprecedented stress. Are we wandering between the two worlds, one dead, other powerless to be born, evocatively mentioned by poet Matthew Arnold? Are we witnessing what the former NSA and my batchmate Shankar Menon says, a world adrift? Addressing high-level meeting of like-minded global South countries on the sideline of the 80th session of UNGA, EM Dr. Jaishankar said, "We are meeting in increasingly uncertain times when the state of the world is a cause of mounting concern for the member states." He further added, "The building blocks of the contemporary order are starting to come apart, and the cost of delaying much delayed reform is today starkly visible." Addressing the BRICS foreign ministers at a separate meeting, Jaishankar said, "In a turbulent world, BRICS must reinforce the message of peace-building dialogue, diplomacy, adherence to international law." He also stressed as rising protectionism, tariff volatility, and non-tariff barriers impact trade flows, BRICS must defend the multilateral trading system. However, the leader who matters most, US President Donald J. Trump, believes BRICS is anti-America and threatens to impose 100% duty on BRIC members who try to opt for non-dollar currencies for business transactions. Trump's ordering of dropping of powerful bunker busters bomb on Iranian nuclear facilities on June 22nd, shaking the world, friends and foes alike, with tariff war, giving a severe dressing down to NATO members, and warning the European countries in his UNGA speech that they will go to hell thanks to their immigration policies, would suggest that Fareed Zakaria's prophecy of post-America world was somewhat premature. Trump has called India the tariff king and her economy as dead economy and prime funder of Russia. His advisors like Navarro have used most coarse language while trade negotiations are still on. This has left India wondering whether the US can ever be trusted. If this is the way the US treats her global comprehensive strategic partner, Henry Kissinger was perhaps right about dangers of becoming a close friend of USA. None would disagree on pursuing a neighbors first policy, but somehow except Bhutan and to some extent Sri Lanka and Maldives, our relations with China, Pakistan, Bangladesh and Nepal can at best be called fraught with tension on several issues. Though we haven't recognized the Taliban regime in Kabul, gradual thaw will be mutually beneficial. PM Modi assiduously cultivated close relations with Gulf countries, especially with Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Oman, in the last 10 years. But the recent mutual defense agreement signed between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan is a cause of concern in spite of Saudi assurances. Arguably, the most extensive outreach to African continent has been undertaken in the 2 terms of Prime Minister Modi. More visits at the level of President, Vice President, and EM have been undertaken to Africa in the last 12 years than the previous 60 years. Both trade and investment are on the rise. Getting AU admitted as a member of G20 at the G20 summit in September 2023 was a far-sighted decision. It's amazing how Trump's foreign policy is triggering off reset in our foreign policy, including relations with China, Russia, EU, Southeast Asia, Latin America. Defense cooperation with Russia has stood the test of time. Both BrahMos missiles and SA-400 air defense system proved vital during Operation Sindoor. While we have diversified our defense import, Russia will remain a major supplier. India has made significant investment in energy sector, Russia, which will stay. But our import of discounted oil from Russia which has become the biggest flashpoint in relation with USA, will have to be addressed. While there is growing disenchantment with the USA thanks to Trump's tariffs and policy on immigration, H-1B visa, and withdrawal of exemption on Sabahar port, we loathe the undiplomatic language used by Trump's team, we have to face the hard reality. We have no option but to have the best possible relation with USA if we want to be Viksit Bharat by 2047. Bilateral collaboration, advanced technologies, innovations, and projects under ISAT in India-US Compact can happen only when the US-India enjoy close relations. Therefore, we will have to work imaginatively to ensure that my dear friend's sentiments don't remain confined to the messages on the X. We have concluded CETA, Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement with the UK, which could be a template for similar agreement with other European countries. India-EU FTA ought to be concluded on priority. Our relations with ASEAN and Southeast Asian countries we further expanded. Many economists believe we might explore the possibility of entry in the RCEP. In Latin America, we are trying to reach out to smaller countries beyond Mexico, Brazil, Argentina. EM's meeting with SICA, Central American Integrated System Foreign Ministers, was a good idea. Same is true about EM's meeting with Ministers of Global South, IPSA, and of course BRICS. At the current UNGA session, there has been repeated stress on the need of UNSC expansion and inclusion of India, Brazil, and Africa. But will it happen without China on board? We have been doing several tightrope walks. We are in Quad, which China thinks is against her. It talks about Ukraine crisis, but not about Gaza. We sit in BRICS, which scathingly criticize attack on Iran and Gaza. We are an SCO that condemn American attack on Iran. Shouldn't we forgive our observers who get confused about where we stand? We shout from the rooftop, and rightly so, that Pakistan is the epicenter of international terror. But when POTUS says he loves Pakistan and receives General Munir and Shehbaz Sharif in the Oval Office, our message seems to have got lost at the White House. The Trump thinks the climate change is a con job where the whole world thinks it's crisis which can't be ignored. We want to have good relations with Russia and Iran, and also with China, and also with the US. How we keep all the four hats in the air is the test of juggling capability of India's diplomacy. Are we pursuing multi-alignment or need-based alignment or working partnership as circumstances demand? When we tend to be everywhere with everybody, is that strategic autonomy? I would rather leave this question for our learned panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, you are going to have very meaningful discussion here. Our panelists already know each one of them has 12 minutes, and this is our timekeeper who helps you track your time. When he's giving first buzzer means you're 10 minutes out. When he gives second buzzer means 12 minutes out, then you can make place for the next speaker. Now, to begin the discussion, I couldn't find a more qualified, more knowledgeable person than Professor Rajamohan, who is everywhere. And every discussion, I watched him discuss certain issues at Bikram Chandra's, I think, discussion a few days back, where he mentioned two things. As you know, President Trump believes in maximum pressure. Professor Rajamohan says putting pressure is the worst form to deal with India. He can elaborate on that. He also be talk about so many things, but there is nothing, no alternative. Reform, reform, reform. Without internal reforms, clever diplomacy will not help. Over to you, Professor Rajamohan.
Thank you, Ambassador Kumar. It's good evening to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. You can't say no to Ambassador Kumar, so he really keeps pulling people in to come and speak. So I think I'll start by referring to a common problem which we not sufficiently appreciated in our public discourse. The assumption that the foreign policy is a success or failure, I mean, that people are ready to pronounce on it. It's not a free enterprise that any country or any sovereign has a free hand to do what he likes, to be successful or not successful. Because you are operating in a system, an international system. So the system, the nature of the system, either limits choices, gives you new choices, or imposes constraints on you. So whatever you do, whatever the nature of your sovereign is, you still have to deal with the realities of the international system. Second, we are not the only sovereign doing foreign policy. There are at least 200 sovereigns in the international system, and each one is pursuing their own interests. Each one is seeking strategic autonomy. And the fact is, these are not all operating in vacuum. That is, choices we make will have effects on other sovereigns, and what other sovereigns do themselves or with each other also affects our choices. So it's a dynamic system in which I think the task of dealing with the external world is a complex one, and that complexity becomes even more demanding when you have major systemic change that is taking place externally. So what I thought I'll do is really to focus on 5 broad elements of external change that today Indian foreign policy has to cope with. The first one is the shall we say, the deconstruction of the economic globalization that emerged at the turn of the 1990s. So whatever India's strategy before 1991 was, the assumption that the world is an open trading system, India could then deal with that world. So kicking and screaming, we were adapting to a world in which, assuming that there was free trade, there will be cross-border flows of investments, and that all you needed was to adjust your domestic policies to facilitate your growth. And I think India has done reasonably well, has grown at 7% or so in the last 3 decades. But that world in which we operated for the last 30 years is no longer with us. And I think what President Trump has done to change the international trading system unilaterally, I know Richard is going to speak about multilateralism, but in the trade case at least, we see the WTO is probably dead, it's not yet buried, but certainly it's not functional, and therefore the system we thought that existed outside, that system has changed. And the demands that Trump is making on allies and partners of how we think about trade policy, of economic policy, of industrial policy, every one of those assumptions, what we had about the US worldview and the US economic policy, all those have changed. Therefore, that's a reality. All countries have today to deal with it. And we, as a late globalizer, luckily we are at 6 to 7% growth rate. So our ability to deal with that is better than some countries. But the fact is, it is a major challenge of adapting to fundamental changes in the international economic system. The second aspect, I think, is the post-1991, we had a situation where most major powers were getting along with each other. China and the US were buddies, Russia and China, Russia and the United States, everyone was happily getting along with each other. And that world was where we didn't have to constantly overlook our shoulder to see what was happening between the other powers. But today, I think what's happened in the last decade, and now much more sharply, US and Russia are at a war in Europe. US and China relationship, we partly see a confrontation, we also partly see a potential for accommodation. So problem is not just with major powers, being nice to each other. When they become, one is the problem of they fighting with each other. The problem is they also come together. There are going to be issues. Last few days, in the US, there is a debate whether Trump, who's going to meet Xi Jinping in October, will change his policy on Taiwan. Whether in order to get economic concessions from China, he's going to make major concessions on American forward military presence or American approach to Taiwan. There's still a debate. US administration of multiple factions. But I think there's something here of a complexity here of how the US-China relationship will play out. And I think, and we already have a problem with the US-Russia relationship, that if anybody had told me after 1991, our relationship with Russia would be a problem with the rest of the world. We thought that we'd gone past that phase. But today, Russia is back at the center as a problem in terms of what we do with Russia has become an issue, whether deliberately or otherwise. But the fact is, that's a reality that exists. So therefore, changes in the great power relations, for good or bad, both, I think, provide a different context today for us to deal with the consequences of that transformation. The third element I wanted to talk about was really the rise of China. I think it's not just a question of our border dispute or we have issues with China. Today, Chinese GDP is 5 times bigger than India's. Chinese military spending is 4 times bigger than ours. We have Chinese military modernization on our borders, Chinese support to our neighbors. Some of it we've seen in Sindoor with Pakistan. So here is the fact. I mean, when China is the second largest economy, second most important military power, the effects of that power are going to radiate inevitably into a neighborhood. It's not something you can wish away. It's not something you can say, look, it doesn't matter. So it's not something you can fix through being nice to them or not being nice to them. So therefore, the transformation of Chinese power and that radiation of that power into the Indian subcontinent provides, I think, fundamental issues here, and how we deal with that is going to be the principal challenge in our own regional environment. And then, of course, we've seen interesting changes in Nepal, in Bangladesh, in other places in the last couple of years. But I think here, there's often the assumption is made, if something happens in our neighborhood, Delhi has failed. Look, I mean, you don't own those countries. How much we like to own them, that all of these countries, even the smallest of them, Bhutan and Maldives, they have politics of their own, they have agencies of their own, they have internal struggles. And I think the question is not who's lost the neighborhood, but the question is, what is the nature of the structural changes taking place in our neighborhood? And how do they intersect with the changes in the great power relations? That again is not something we don't have the automatic right to have a veto over policies. The question is, can we adapt effectively to the changes that are taking place? And do we protect our interests amidst structural change taking place within the countries and externally the impact of the major power relations under the system? So I think this is a big challenge. I mean, I'm sure my colleagues on the panel are going to talk about the neighborhood policy. The fourth set of issues I want to talk about was the diaspora. We've celebrated our diaspora in the last 30 years. I mean, today, one calculation at least, the MEA says 35 million Indians, people of Indian origin, are abroad. In a way, we've seen them as a living bridge to the rest of the world. But today the anti-Indian techie stuff that is going on in the US. Now, I have something to say here, which is, a lot of people are outraged that the, US Indian techies are being treated badly. But I think, visa is a sovereign right. I mean, some of the foreigners here know how difficult it is to get an Indian visa, because India exercises quite a bit of sovereignty in terms of who it allows into the country. So merely saying, look, suddenly we're being targeted, I think ignores the fundamental change that is taking place within the Anglo-Saxon world. Because it is the Anglo-Saxon world and its open borders in the last 50 years that has allowed significant technological skill migration from India into the English-speaking world. But within those countries, there is change in the domestic politics that is creating complications. And I think we've got to understand that. That is the question of the backlash against too much of immigration. We thought is only limited to US, but is also increasingly in UK. We're also going to see it in Europe. So the toxic politics of immigration, after all, we also have a debate on foreigners in our midst, that you don't want too many foreigners in your country. So what were happy, open societies, but in the middle of economic crisis and the disempowerment of some sections, there is actually a backlash that is targeting the Indian techies in the US. So it is not that India was pushing the techies there, it was the American companies that wanted cheaper professional labor. Now, if the logic of that changes either economically or because of politics within those countries, you're going to have a new situation. That's exactly what we have. Because in the end, the company's interest has not changed. They would still prefer cheaper labor, but then the opposition to it from the Make America Great Again movement. And it's not just from the right. I don't know how many of you remember 5 years ago, the New York Times did a series of stories on H-1B. How the Indian companies have gamed it, it's all going to the Indians, it is taking away jobs. So it's both on the left and the right of the American political spectrum. There are arguments that what H-1B has done to the American middle class. And it's not just there. Many other countries, even in Singapore, there are beginnings of restrictions on immigration. So I think there is actually the changes in the global immigration politics provides a new context in which we have to deal with the whole question of Indian immigration and the Indian diaspora. There's a new situation. And I think this situation is further complicated by the fact the diasporas are divided today. Every bit of domestic conflict in India expresses itself within the diasporas. And that in turn is a ricochet effect back and forth between what happens here, what happens there, and their political mobilization. We've seen that in Canada for a while, we see that in Britain. So when you have larger numbers, people also begin to mobilize them for their own domestic political purposes. So this is the higher your numbers, the greater the complexity that's beginning to emerge. So finally, the last point I wanted to make was on technology. The nature of technology today, the new technologies that have emerged are going to transform not just economic landscape, but also a large number of political effects. The question then becomes, are we capable of coping with this technological change? For example, if your IT sector contributes a significant portion of Indian GDP, and if AI begins to affect that sector, then the question is, what do we do? Whether jobs will be taken away or not, but the fact is, we have to adapt to that technological change. And I think that is the key. Here again, I would say, in all these issues, unless we invest more in technology, with just 0.7% of R&D, that's what we do in India. Our idea that we can actually compete in the marketplace when technological change is taking place is a big problem. So I think we need more R&D. We need better scientific institutions. We need more scientific institutions. Unless we focus on that, merely complaining about Chinese advances or American policies is not going to help us. So broadly what I said, globalization has changed. Nature of great power relations is changing. The regional environment is changing because of Chinese power. We have a diaspora which is under stress, internally divided and externally contested. And finally, we have technological change. So the question is, dealing with these issues, so it's not clever diplomacy, it's not how smart our diplomats are, but it is internally, how do we deal with these big external changes? I think that is a real problem that we have today.
Thank you, Professor Raja Mohan. You have given a broader picture and also set the context. Now I will request Ruchira Kamboj to share her thoughts. There has been a lot of talk recent UNGA session about the expansion of UN Security Council prospects of countries like India. And also you also perhaps comment on, there is a considerable confusion in mind of many Indians. How do we vote in various resolutions in UN in the last 2 years? Sometimes we have voted on resolutions, sometimes we have abstained, and sometimes we have opposed them. Over to you.
Thank you, sir. And good evening, everybody. Needless to say, I'm very honored to share the panel with such a distinguished panel, and it's wonderful to meet all of you. And thank you to Ambassador Surendra Kumar for putting this all together. Well, I've been asked to bring in the UN perspective, and I will deal with two questions essentially. Is the UN relevant? That's the eternal question. And of course, our voting as far as Gaza is concerned in the United Nations General Assembly. So is the UN relevant? Is it still useful? Well, I would say that the UN is politically weak, and that is because of the veto. The veto, which was a precondition, as you would all recall, for the P5 to join the United Nations when it was formed in 1945. In fact, it was as bad as no veto, no United Nations. Now, what does the veto do? As all of you know, it ensures that if any decision does not appeal to any one of the P5, well, that does not then take place or happen, and ensuring thereby that the United Nations does not work against the P5. Now, there have been many, many instances over the years when the veto has completely gridlocked the Security Council, but if we just look at Ukraine and Gaza, I think one would be able to understand the situation very well. As far as Ukraine is concerned, the situation is quite extraordinary because one of the P5 members themselves is a party to the conflict. And as far as Gaza is concerned, the United States has acted more or less as a proxy for Israel. The result, nothing has happened, no movement, nothing. And because the Security Council has been stymied, the matter has moved to the United Nations General Assembly, where unfortunately, the General Assembly has no legal enforcement power, just moral pressure that can be put on the world community. A very quick look at how the veto has worked since 1945, just to give you a very quick idea. The number one user of the veto has been the Soviet Union and the Russia combined. Since 1945, they have used about 129 vetoes. Next in line is the United States, about 89. After that, the UK, about 29, but to be very honest, they haven't used the veto since 1989. Next in line is China with about 21 vetoes, and France, which is the lowest at 16. China is very interesting. I will pause for a minute because from 1945 until 1971, the Taiwan, which represented China in the United Nations, used the veto just once. And from 1971 until 1997, China doesn't really use the veto, just about 7 times. But suddenly from 2000, there's an uptick. And China moves from being an abstainer to a blocker and has used the veto about 14 times since 2000, bringing their total to 21. Now, what is the way forward? It is politically weak, and it is what it is. But that said, I would argue rather, that the UN is still indispensable. And why do I say so? Because as all of you know, it is the only universal body that keeps all 193 countries under one roof. Big and small, rich and poor, landlocked and coastal, developed or developing, all of them come under one roof. And while it is trendy, even fashionable, to talk about plurilateral organizations, please remember that they are not inclusive. It is a positive trend, I would say, because you can find quick solutions, but remember, plurilaterals are workarounds. It's not the real thing. And I will give you one real example. The year was 2023. India was the chair of the G20, and I got instructions to scale up a decision taken at the G20 development ministers meeting on an SDG stimulus and scale it up to the United Nations. And well, it did not happen, even though 2 months down the line, there was an SDG summit in the United Nations. And why did that not happen? Because all countries felt that the decisions taken by 20 do not reflect the wishes of the majority of member states. And that should not be so surprising, because India's position also is that if you are not participating in the negotiation of a resolution, well, then you cannot co-sponsor that resolution. And that is precisely the line that the remainder of the countries took at the United Nations. We were not party to these decisions, so these cannot be scaled up. So that's just to give you an idea that plurilateralism is great. It is working very efficiently. It is a way to solve some of the problems of today, but please remember, it is a workaround. The United Nations, of course, also is the only body that gives a platform to small states. Please don't forget, one country, one vote. That principle is very, very critical to the smaller states. It is a platform for them to share their concerns and priorities, and the UN provides them with a platform, their interests, which would otherwise go unnoticed in the depredations of an unequal world. So there you are. I would say reform is absolutely necessary, even though it seems highly implausible today. But I will also say in the same breath that it is the hardest nut to crack. And why do I say that? Simply because it touches the balance of power that was supposedly fixed in 1945. Now, because time is short, I'll move on to my next topic, even though this is a somewhat long topic and it has no conclusion. Witness the fact that in the United Nations for about 4 decades, the discussion on UN Security Council reform has been continuing with no conclusion. As far as India's vote on Gaza is concerned, I have been told that it has confused many people. Well, I would argue that actually India's vote is quite consistent, has been quite consistent, and therefore is quite credible as well. So let's look very quickly at India's position. Where has India voted on Gaza? India has not vacillated between a yes or a no, simply between a for vote and an abstention vote. So let's look at India's basic position. The basic position has been, we have condemned terrorism, and that's absolutely unequivocal. India condemns terrorism, period. We have also expressed our deepest concern at the humanitarian situation on the ground and have also walked the talk. We have supplied humanitarian and relief aid to UNRWA. And finally, we continue to support the two-state solution, ironical as that might sound today. Now, there have been about 6 votes since October 7, 2023. The first vote was in October itself, which was an abstention vote, because that resolution did not mention Hamas. Then we move on to December 2023, and India supports the resolution, votes in favor for an immediate ceasefire. That resolution is more balanced. You move on to May 2023, where India again supports a resolution on greater recognition, greater UN rights for Palestine. December 24, again India supports the resolution in the UNGA for a ceasefire, which balances the requirement for a ceasefire, immediate requirement for a ceasefire, expresses concern at the humanitarian situation on the ground, and at the same time condemns terrorism. You move on to 2025, and then you have the controversial resolution, I think, of June 2025, which Ambassador Surendra Kumar was mentioning. Well, this confuses a lot of people, because India abstains on this resolution again. Now, why does it abstain? Because there are certain legal aspects that are questionable for India. And here, what is very interesting is that with about 140, 150 countries supporting the resolution, so therefore, if in a sort of if 140 to 150 countries support a resolution, which includes countries such as the P5, which is France included, abstention perhaps might signal to some might signal caution rather than leadership, and lets other Global South members look more forward-leaning. Let's quickly compare the positions of the other leading lights of the Global South. China has been solidly behind the Palestinian cause, so his South Africa, of course, very strong position it has taken, and also Brazil. So India's abstention throws many people into a tizzy. Why has India abstained on this? But then again, as Professor Rajamohan was also saying, these are sovereign decisions taken in the best national interest. But immediately afterwards, in September, this very month, at the UNGA, in support of a two-state solution, a resolution is moved in the General Assembly, and India again favors the resolution. So if you toggle this very quickly, you will see that the voting pattern has been abstain, yes, 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 abstain, and then again, yes. Well, I would say, I was also thinking about this question, I would say that in those instances where the resolution is balanced, which balances the terrorism with the humanitarian angle, India will invariably support that resolution. But where it feels that there is no clarity or that the balance is not there, then India invariably abstains. I think one could look at it from that lens. And that is, I think, the position that India has been adopting at the UNGA. Our leadership at the United Nations, as I sign off, I will say that if you look at India's statement at the UNGA 80 this year, and also if you look at some of the other statements, there were some very good statements made at UNGA 80. For example, a country like China came with a whole host of projects. It was not just a blueprint, but they brought a whole toolkit to the United Nations. They talked about a China-UN South-South Development Facility. They talked about a UNDP Center for the South in Shanghai. They talked about several initiatives as far as AI is concerned. Whereas a country like India brought a whole set of normative principles, which are also important. And this is my point. Normative leadership is also important. So India talked about counter-terrorism, something that is very critical to India. India talked about reformed multilateralism, again, the whole issue of the reform of the United Nations system. And India framed its statement from a Global South perspective. So all of these things are also very important, and I think this is well recognized in the United Nations system. Having served in the United Nations twice, I can certainly say that India is widely viewed as a bridge builder, as a consensus builder, as a country that speaks with reason, has a balanced voice, and a country that speaks not just for itself, but also on behalf of others. So this is what I mean. The normative leadership that India provides at the United Nations is not to be underestimated. And as far as the reform proposal is concerned, India leads in the debates, in the discussions, and while many people feel that it is somewhat implausible at this stage, that might be in the present moment, but the question remains that reform is a journey. It is an aspiration. And therefore, India will and must continue that, leading from the front, because as I always say, if India doesn't lead on reform, well, then who will? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruchira, for removing fog about our voting patterns. I will turn to Mr. Sanjay Joshi. There could be no better person to enlighten us about the energy security and how this import of Russian discounted oil has become flashpoint. Both Prime Minister, EAM on the floor of the Parliament have drawn red lines, and it is one of the red lines. So I don't know whether red line will become green line or something else, but over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador Gulmohar, for getting me here. And it's always a difficult act to follow Raja and, of course, Ambassador Kamboj. But a great panel you have assembled here. To begin with, see, you've said that energy, is it going to be a red line or a green line? See, energy is like that, you know the story about that if Krishna could be hurt anywhere, could be killed from anywhere, it was on his heel. And ultimately, the Behelia shot him in his heel, that well-aimed arrow. And that arrow in the heel, even if it does not kill you, can hobble you permanently. And that is the situation with energy. Energy is today become a weapon. It's become a tool to hobble. And it is not just today. In fact, if I start, people keep talking about Trump all the time. This is not to do with Trump. This is a much larger trajectory which has been shaping over a long period. And there are specific reasons why we have reached where we have today. And India is just one of the victims of larger plays which have been happening in the global energy scenario. Come to think of it, the energy trade, we speak of globalization. Energy trade was never really globalized. Energy trade was always, even during the best years of globalization, has been a completely restricted trade under all kinds of restrictions, sanctions, and who can sell, who cannot sell. Now look at the bigger picture. And I'll specifically talk about oil and gas because the whole dispute, the fight is about the oil and gas trade. And look at the world of oil and gas. Which are the countries which have the largest oil resources? Which is the country? Venezuela. Now then others follow. Which is the country which has the largest gas reserves? No, and you can go on asking these questions. Today, if you start looking at the world around us, you find that the countries with the largest oil reserves and the largest gas reserves have been rendered unproducible. Their molecules cannot enter the market by any methodology whatsoever. And the story does not really begin with today. The story is much older than this. It starts with the Vietnam War, US crisis, post the Vietnam War, the collapse of the Bretton Woods system, and the emergence of the petrodollar. These were all strategic. Energy always has been a strategic tool to play, a weapon to be used to be able to manipulate and change the face of geopolitics. And it's at that point of time, from that point of time, once Saudi Arabia, the deal with Saudi Arabia on security became enshrined in the petrodollar system, you also saw sanctions coming on Iran because Iran had to be kept out of the global markets. And other countries followed suit. The situation changes in 2008. On one side there's an economic crisis, and for the first time the hegemony of the dollar starts, the first signals of the dollar hegemony starting to be challenged. That is 2008. But 2008 something else also happens, and that is the shale gale in the United States of America, where shale oil and shale gas start getting produced. And within a few years of that, by 2018, the United States of America has overshot Saudi Arabia as the largest producer. 2023, another interesting point of view. 2023, US becomes the largest gas exporter in the world. Now, look at these timelines, 1 year after the Ukraine war. Now, there are certain mechanics in this. You start looking at reserve production ratios across the world. The US has the shortest reserve production ratio, 10 to 12 years. They do not keep discovered oil in the ground beyond that. It is produced, it is sold, it is monetized. They know there's a carbon clock ticking. They may be denying climate change for the time being, but and President Trump, one of his first actions was, when he became president, was to completely resign America and the Paris Agreement and walk out of it. But even before he did that, the biggest bankers in America had already walked out of all climate alliances, the net zero alliances. They said, we are not going to be supporting them, we're not going to be thinking of these anymore. They could see the writing on the wall very clearly. And then comes the drill baby drill program. Go on, drill, keep on producing more and more and more and more. Now there is, to be able to produce more, prices need to be at a certain level, otherwise how do you make money out of it? So to keep certain prices, you have to have a restricted trade. And sanctions on Russia, not just sanctions are one part of it, the complete weaponization of the SWIFT system, which completely made the interbanking system collapse around the world, which created a crisis in many countries, not just as far as sale of oil was concerned, but in the larger commodity market. Now, in that situation, what emerges post-Ukraine war, and mind you, and this is not during Trump's time, Nord Stream 2, the pipeline connecting Russia and Germany, is destroyed, not during Trump's time. It happened before that. Trump, during his first term, had already been pressing Europe to give up Russian energy and buy gas from LNG terminals coming from the US. Why? Because US was surplus. Gas prices in the US were hovering around $2 to $3 MMBTU. Unviable, unproducible. So how do you get prices higher? The only way is getting into the LNG trade. So US becomes a great motivator, pusher to get more LNG. And what LNG? LNG means long-term LNG contracts which tie in countries in the name of security, in the name of energy security, saying we will securitize your energy, we will give you supply and pay contracts, which means if I do not supply you gas, I will pay you. This gas is guaranteed to come to you. Now, these are the kinds of contracts, and there's security premium on it. We keep talking energy security. Security has a premium. So the energy security premium they are marketing is from $3 MMBTU Henry Hub gas. It is actually lower than $3 today. From $3 MMBTU Henry Hub gas, the price now becomes $11, $13, captured at $8 premium. And it looks good because Europe, mind you, bought gas during the Ukraine war at $70 MMBTU when Russian gas got cut off. Now, this is the leverage which the seller has in the market on a commodity like energy. Now, this is the larger game which you can see happening, and there are lots of parties. It is not just a matter of buying and selling. The financial plumbing is very important. The financial plumbing today is still provided in spite of every other pressure which may come. We keep talking de-dollarization. The financial plumbing is still being provided by the SWIFT system. 80% of trade is still dollar trade. It still happens in dollars in spite of everything else. So how do payments get made? Who gets paid? How do you pay Russia? It is not just the fact that India says, okay, I am going to go ahead and buy from Russia. It doesn't matter. If tariffs, penal tariffs are imposed on Russian gas or Russian oil, I'm still going to go on buying. It does not matter. It's a strategic decision for me. How do payments get made? What systems are used for payments? See, all that plumbing needs to be restructured, reconfigured, and everybody knows it. So energy becomes a lever for coercion, and it is coercion to get a larger trade deal in a situation where the US wants to set up certain examples, as to say, okay, Ukraine war is one part. You have been funding the Ukraine war, but if you start looking at it, China funded the Ukraine war far more. When gas was being sold into European markets at $70 a barrel, who was making the money? Chinese companies. All Russian gas got diverted by pipelines, and now you have the power of Siberia pipelines coming up, which are supplying, which actually will substitute all European gas which was being sold into Europe, by gas being sold to China. So Russia loses, yes, but does not lose so much. It still gets a market for this gas. This gas, when it starts coming into China, was actually all the LNG cargoes which they had contracted were being sold into Europe at that huge price. Now, cargoes contracted at $7, $8 MMBTU were being sold at $70 MMBTU into Europe. Who funded the war? So this is the kind of scenario which we are seeing in the oil and gas trade developing today. For India, what does it matter? How does it matter? What does India do in a situation like this? See, controlling the energy trade is not just a matter of finding the buyers, finding the sellers. As I said, one part of it is where you buy from, who you buy from. That diversification is very important, and that needs to happen all the time. A big problem which India is going to face is that there's a lot of pressure in India today to sign LNG contracts from Russia. Now, gas is actually very small in the Indian market. It's only about 7-8% of the net market. Still, we hope for 15%, but it's a long way because we don't have the infrastructure. But even there, the pressure is buy all this gas from the US as LNG. As I said, there's a huge premium there. The more important thing is there's excess capacity in gas being built up over the next 5-6 years. We are going to be having, we have about 450 MMT of LNG capacity existing. You're going to see 50% expansion in the next few years. Now, all these, a large part of it is going to be coming up in the US because they want to produce as much gas as they want and sell it in the global markets. So exactly the way Europe got pressurized into substituting American gas for Russian gas, we are going to be facing the same kinds of pressures, and other countries are going to be facing the same kind of pressures. These long-term contracts do not help us because the prices are too high. See, for both in oil and gas, ultimately the leverage, the problem with India is the coercion creates instability in the domestic market. Instability in the sense that your fiscal deficit completely goes haywire. It goes out of control. Remember the 1990 economic crisis after the Gulf War was purely a result of oil prices. That is what caused that economic crisis. So for India, there's certain, where we say this is red line, that is why this is red line. We cannot negotiate on this. But then where do we negotiate on? So oil and gas become the real kind of pawn pieces in a larger game of strategy, which is to do with the larger strategy, the foreign policy, which India must adopt, how it must hedge its bets, what are the kind of alliances it can build, where does it get leverage? Ultimately, US, yes, you can't do without the US, you will have to negotiate with the US. So where does India build leverage with the US? How does it get some leverage in this complex game which is going to be played? And this is not just going to be the energy trade, this is a much larger game which is going to be played. And I keep on saying that, typically we think in terms of strategy is a game of chess. That is a normal game that is used to explain strategy, and that is how we must be playing. Chess is actually played between equals. Where I come from, in the villages there's a different game which is played. It's called Bagh and Bakri, between the predator and the one preyed upon. So when politics turns predatory, then the game is Bagh and Bakri. What is the Bagh and Bakri game? The Bagh, which is the predator, can kill the Bakri. But the problem is the Bakri cannot kill the Bagh, unlike chess. The only thing the goat can do is to strategize, surround the Bagh, build alliances, build the kind of right leverages, either using the fact of the Indo-Pacific. And we did try to do some of that recently, as you saw. We went to the SCO. We sent emissaries to China. The Prime Minister went to China. Prime Minister plans to go to China also. So now these are things which need to be done, to be exacting that kind of leverage, and not just, these are not things which have to be done visibly. A lot of this has to be done invisibly, below the radar. No tweets. Thankfully, please, no tweets. Don't rush to announce these deals in the press. Stay quiet. Let them be discovered. This is the kind of strategy which needs to be played out in the much larger framework of things. That is all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joshi. You have given the insight in the complexity of energy sector. I turn to you, sir. You have heard everybody. You can say what you want to say and make things clearer for us.
Well, thank you, Surendra. I don't know if I can make anything very clear because everything is very confused. And the person who's confusing everybody in the world is the President of the United States. I think the biggest reason for the flux that you mentioned is actually Trump's foreign policy. He is upending the existing global system, which in any case was not perfect. But he is in the process of destroying it. He has eviscerated the WTO. He is using tariffs as a weapon, and not only for trade reasons, but also for political reasons. He is quite eclectic in this regard. Of course, we feel that we are being targeted, but he is targeting everybody, including his allies and friends and partners. He is humiliating and insulting countries and leaders. I think the US foreign policy today is in the hands, unfortunately, of a capricious, unpredictable, and narcissistic leader. And worse, he is handing over US foreign policy to businessmen. It rather surprises me that Steve Witkoff or people like that are the interlocutors of people like Putin. I mean, Witkoff cannot understand or deal with Putin. He has no experience. But he has the ear and confidence of Trump. And he's surrounding, as I said, he's surrounded himself with his business partners, his real estate business partners, or financial people. And unfortunately, since the United States is a global power, it should actually pay a lot of attention to geopolitics and strategy at the global level. And it can't simply be trade. But he is neglecting, to my mind, national security and geopolitics as a very prime component of US foreign policy. I mean, he presents himself as a peace leader. He propagates his peace agenda. But as we know, it is very erratic, self-serving, and grossly inconsistent. He has an obsession with the Nobel Peace Prize. Initially, I thought that this is not unusual. We've had leaders in our own countries who tried to solve the India-Pakistan issues, and the commentary was that they were looking for the Nobel Peace Prize. But I think in Trump's case, it is more than that. It is pathological. He actually is demanding the Nobel Prize Committee to give him the Nobel Peace Prize. This is rather surprising. He's the President of the United States of America, the most powerful position in the world. And yet he's hankering after recognition from the Nobel Peace Committee. Of course, to his credit, one can say, whatever his motivations, that he's tried to end the conflict in Ukraine. But if you then see how much complicit he is in the massive destruction in Gaza, then you can't sort of understand what is actually motivating him when he talks about peace. It is so contradictory that it defies an easy explanation. Now we know he has needlessly struck blows to ties with India. And I think one of the reasons is that his Nobel Peace Prize obsession got a bit complicated, because he made claims that he had arranged the ceasefire between India and Pakistan. But the government of India quite rightfully said that it was not the case. But he's not taken even our official declarations to the effect as a deterrent. I think now people are counting, he's about 40 times repeated that he arranged the ceasefire between India and Pakistan. And in order to make his claim to the Nobel Peace Prize even more pressing and important, he brought in the nuclear dimension. That these are two nuclear countries, they were about to go in for a nuclear conflict between them. So therefore there is certainly an element of pique in what he's doing vis-a-vis India. Though of course when it comes to tariffs, even during his first term, he was castigating India as the tariff king. But he's unwilling to look at facts. He's repeated this thing about tariff king now, and Navarro has called us the Maharaja of tariffs. But he's unwilling to look at facts. And there are people here in India who have examined what the actual balance of trade between the two countries is, if you take into account the money that is spent on education, our people going there, our students going there, and then of course the living expenses there, then the IP transfers and other forms of financial transfers. And some have calculated actually there is a sizable positive balance insofar as US is concerned. Now when he says that trading with India is a disaster and that we can't sell anything to India, I mean, it's plain nonsense, because he's in any case, even if there's a $42 billion deficit, he's selling a lot to India. And when it comes to services, actually there is a small positive balance in favor of the United States of America. So in this 200 and some billion dollars, $88 billion is services, and United States is selling us about about $44.45 billion of services to India. So he's unwilling to look at facts. He has no head for facts, because facts, if you want to absorb facts, then you have to be alert. You have to study the documents, you have to consult with people, you have to absorb things. But as he said that, I believe in intuition. I don't believe in process. And now the President of the United States making global policies on basis of intuition, I think it's a bit comical. His henchmen, in order to please him, are abusing India. I mean, you must have seen the clips of his cabinet meeting, where each one of them in turn was demonstrating levels of psychophancy in a very competitive way. And some people said it was more Kim Jong-un having a cabinet meeting rather than the President of the United States of America. Now he's imposed 50% tariffs on India. 25% are because we are buying oil from the United States. He's also imposed 50% tariffs on Brazil. And this 25% penalty is nothing to do with trade, although mind you, I was quite struck by Sanjay Joshi's explanation of how this energy thing is a highly political tool to control. So Brazil has US has a surplus with Brazil. And nevertheless, he's imposed 50% tariffs because Bolsonaro, the previous president, a conservative, is looked at with great admiration by Trump. And Bolsonaro has now been, I think, sentenced to 25 years in prison or whatever. So this 50% tariffs is Trump's way of showing his anger at the manner in which Bolsonaro is being treated. And in our case, it's a political decision to force us to reduce our purchase of Russian oil. I'm told by our own people that what the United States wants us to do is to reduce our oil purchases from Russia by an order of 30%, and move to buy oil from the United States, and gas from the United States of America. But the catch in this is, even if we were willing to do so discreetly as part of the trade agreement, he doesn't want it to be announced as part of the trade agreement. He wants it to be announced beforehand so that he can show that he has compelled India to bend to his will. It's part of his whole tactics of trying to humiliate foreign leaders, as he has done with the Europeans and with the Japanese and with the South Koreans. He wants to demonstrate that he's getting his way, Unfortunately, because we have stood our ground, he is ratcheting up pressures on India. He has sanctioned us on the Chabhar port, as it was mentioned. He's targeted the H-1B program. He's also potentially threatening our pharma exports to the United States. His argument is that instead of selling all these generic drugs and everything else, you should set up production facilities in the United States. So we're telling him that if we set up production facilities in the United States, we can't produce the pharma, the generic drugs at the cost at which we produce in India. So the cost will be very high if we produce there. But he's impervious to that. He wants us to make that commitment. And as I said, he wants us to buy more US LNG. He's totally ignoring the fact that China is the biggest buyer of Russian oil. Mind you, a lot of this oil and gas goes to China through pipelines. So it's not as if China is buying discounted Russian oil. They are buying it on the basis of long-term price agreements, whatever they are. And now, of course, there's the Power of Siberia pipeline that is being constructed. And this is happening now, and nevertheless, he's not imposed any tariffs, or extra punitive tariffs on China. Clear case of double standards, but there it is. We can keep hollering about double standards, but it doesn't seem to make much difference. The fate of the Quad, if you mind, I'll exceed a little bit. The fate of the Quad, unfortunately, is not clear. To my mind, the Quad summit should not be held, because Trump is very uncertain whether he'll come, because already the State Department has somebody has indicated from the White House, no, State Department, that he might come this year or he might come next year. So they have given themselves an option of postponing it to next year. But the problem is, if he did come, he can say anything, he loves talking to the press totally irresponsibly, and he can embarrass our Prime Minister, and then he'll have a lot of problem undoing what Trump might say. So he's dangerous in that regard. So I personally feel that we should bide our time, see if our relationship can be stabilized and we can have more confidence in dealing with him, and then we can think of his visit to India for Quad or whatever else. Even the Indo-Pacific concept has is no longer figuring in the United States discourse. This time when our foreign minister went there, he had a lot of meetings. He met Rubio. Also, if you look at Rubio's tweet or X thing after he met Jaishankar, he talked about pharmaceuticals, he talked about trade, he didn't mention the word strategic partnership, he didn't mention Indo-Pacific, he didn't mention Quad. It was all the agenda that Trump is trying to push. And then Pakistan. He's wooing Pakistan, which is a new development. He's in the past said that we've given $30-some billion to Pakistan, and all we have received in return is lies and deceit. But somehow he has this obsession that he should mediate between India and Pakistan and resolve the Kashmir issue. And in his first term, when he met Imran Khan, he said publicly, which was very embarrassing, that Modi has asked him to mediate on Kashmir, which of course we denied. But during his second term, he's come back to it. And he's talked about mediation, because he thinks that if he mediates and gets this problem out of the way, then his eligibility for the Nobel Peace Prize would get consolidated. And somehow he's found a great love and admiration for Asim Munir. He constantly praises him. Even yesterday, he said when he announced his peace plan in Gaza, that he said Asim Munir first, and then he said Shahbaz Sharif. Wonderful, wonderful person. They have supported my peace plan, that kind of a thing. 3 times he's met Asim Munir, once privately in the White House for lunch, second time at the UN General Assembly, followed by another meeting in the White House, where Asim Munir, as the Field Marshal of Pakistan, had a wooden box full of rare earths. I thought these were sandwiches, but they were rare earths which he was selling to Trump, whatever. Now, the problem here is that, and then this Pakistan-Saudi Defense Pact. This has, to my mind, happened with the encouragement and countenancing of the United States of America. There is no way that this pact could have been signed unless there was a green light from the United States of America. The United States has the biggest base in Bahrain and in Qatar. Saudi defense equipment is all from the United States of America. They will not take a major decision like this without getting a green light from the United States. The manner in which all of them have signed up to this Gaza Pact, this 20-point plan or whatever it is, you see how much they are willing to be, how should I say, bullied by the United States of America on an issue which goes to the heart of Arab self-respect and Arab interest, the whole Palestinian conflict. But they are willing to sign on this plan, and if you read it, it's full of so many pitfalls and loopholes, it will never get implemented. This is my view. Anyway, Pakistan goes and offers a nuclear cover, not only to Saudi Arabia, but to the other countries in the region. And the United States, and this has serious non-proliferation implications, but the United States doesn't utter a word, so I think we have to look very carefully at what is happening. Concern is not that Saudi Arabia will join hands with Pakistan tomorrow if there's an India-Pakistan conflict, which they won't do. But the concern is elsewhere, that they will give funds to Pakistan, money to Pakistan to buy weapons. And those weapons can be bought from China, can even be bought from the United States of America. This could be another blow that he could deliver, you never know. He might resume arms sales to Pakistan. And even if even if that doesn't happen and he buys from China, US will live with it, because they have accommodated each other in terms of Pakistan's ability to have friendly relations with both sides. Now look, for example, at Gwadar, the CPEC. United States has never protested, never opposed this. There's nothing come out in any writings here or there where you would feel that they put pressure on Pakistan to go slow on the CPEC and not permit the Chinese to have a base on the Makran coast. They are silent on that, but they have sanctioned us on Chabahar. And Chabahar actually hurts our strategic interests in terms of our access to Afghanistan and Central Asia. But it helps the Chinese, because if you sanction Chabahar and you don't sanction Gwadar, then you are giving, actually, you are facilitating Chinese entry into the Indian Ocean. And it's facilitated access to the Gulf countries, where America is present in a very solid way. So these are some of the things we have to, well, let me very briefly, I'll just take a minute, because I think one should talk about India's choices. I would agree that while antagonism towards India is a setback, but we have to understand that the most important relationship, fortunately or unfortunately, we have is with the United States of America. We can't substitute our relationship with the United States with relationship with any other country. So we have to manage this relationship. We have to somehow bide our time and hope that somehow things will begin to get redressed in due course. We must avoid polemics. We must not enter into any arguments with the United States. If leverages have to be developed, they should be developed quietly. And which, in any case, is part of our foreign policy of strategic autonomy, where we are member of SCO, we are member of BRICS. So we can actually strengthen our cooperation within those organizations. We are sort of leaders of the global south, so we can emphasize that part of our foreign policy. And when it comes to be not in favor of de-dollarization, but we want to be able to trade in our national currencies, that agenda can be promoted. We can strengthen our ties with Brazil. I'm quite struck by the fact that we are reviving IPSA, which has sort of gone into oblivion. We must preserve our ties with Russia. The only stable relationship we have with any great power today is with Russia. With China, we have a difficult relationship. With the United States, we now have difficulties, but it's only the relationship with Russia that remains stable, and therefore we must preserve that. And when Putin is coming here in December, which is going to actually cause a lot of angst in the Western world. When he comes here, after when he comes here, we have to announce some important decisions. It can't just be a protocol visit. And when that happens, then there'll be a lot of backlash. Europe is a very good bet for us. They are also smarting under US bullying. They want to have other possibilities, develop other partnerships. They can't do with China because China they consider a systematic rival. India is safe, and India has all the prerequisites of the kind of partnership that they are looking for. And we must therefore be proactive, and if we can sign the FTA with them before the end of the year, it'll be great. We must pay more attention to our ties with Japan, which we are, and a little more opening towards China. Studied, careful opening in order to get the kind of levers Sanjay was talking about. And in the Middle East and West Asia, our cooperation with UAE must be strengthened more and more. That's a courageous country and is willing to take a lot of risks and defy pressures. So that is a country we should pay attention. Some aversions to Iran would also be helpful. There's other things that I could say, but I think I've exceeded my time so much. I will leave it where it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Give a big hand to our panelists. They have really enlightened us. We will have some time for questions, but I don't want any statement and comments. Mr. Jain, you have been dealing with gas pipeline for more than 30 years. Do you have any question on gas issue? Gas has been, bring the mic here. Because he is somebody who has been dealing with gas here.
No, sir, my only point is, India is very fortunate. We are surrounded by humongous quantities of oil and gas in our neighborhood. So we should not be having a problem. I think there are at least 10 countries from where we can buy oil and 3 or 4 from gas also. So I think the government has to look at our neighbors carefully, and hopefully we can get some gas. I think.
Okay. Neelam, you want to say something about China angle? Please, mic there. Very brief.
Well, give me time to at least thank the excellent panelists and excellent presentations. I think starting with the first to the last, I think we have many answers and many more questions, but of course we are not going to get the time. No, I will not bore you with China. I think I'll go to the subject which gets, it's so important but gets the least attention, and that is multilateralism. And there, I agree entirely with Ambassador Kamboj that India has an excellent, a robust record, I think, in normative leadership, particularly in the early years of 50s, 60s, I think, and 70s. But, well, and where we even stood alone as a single country, I think, opposing, very, very difficult pressures by the very important countries. But China, which was timid to begin with, as you said, even in using its veto power, it had just come, from the cold, has learned the game beautifully, I think. And while we, I think, are concentrating too much on the plurilateral organizations, which are good, as you say, they serve also their special purposes, but then that was also part of our being with the, having made it to the rich boys club. That's inevitable. But forgetting perhaps that UN, as you rightly said, is really the most important body. We still are a developing country. And all these claims to global leadership are really becoming hollow words. Look at what China has done. 2 years ago, it announced in the UNGA, in September 23, the Vice President of China comes up with this grand design, which Xi Jinping repeated at SU, of global governance. You see, it shows that they have understood how to use the UN system now. So, to cut the story short, I guess, whereas you just said, in the recent GA, we proposed, well, they came up with many schemes, we came up also. What are our, we come up again, terrorism, we come up with UN reform. These are, they look like our national interests. There was a time, we must raise these, but there was a time we raised up against apartheid, against nuclear disarmament. That is what is going to give us the global leadership. Having said that, and you know now the multilateral, having done it from New York, is there any possibility that we could work with China? I can see no other field really where we can, except where our business and industry needs are there, and we need to have a plausible, a modus vivendi with China. But particularly on this, where China is now looking for partners and has a much stronger constituency in the global south. Perhaps go with them, work, can we work together on some of the proposals, and also blocks are what they really, we know what they're doing also. Thank you.
Ruchira, you want to say something?
I'll speak very briefly. Firstly, I agree 100% with you. I think over the years, China has very silently and steadily used the UN system to its advantage, so much so that today, in terms of financing the United Nations, both the general budget and also the peacekeeping budget, it is shoulder to shoulder with the United States. It's providing 20% of the general budget and 23% of the assessed peacekeeping budget. Then, of course, it is the only P5 country that actually provides troops on the ground in African countries. Would you call that altruism? I don't think so. There are strategic interests in Africa that China has. Likewise, it runs a very successful China UN Peace and Development Trust Fund, which is located in the Office of the Secretary General, and it has undertaken over 160 projects in over 100 countries. And then, of course, the top posts across the UN system at the junior level. And this year, Li Keqiang, the Chinese premier, came with a whole toolkit, not just a blueprint. They came with projects. And if you look at their projects, they are pretty substantial. All of them, whether it's a center in Shanghai for developing countries, because that's its constituency. Whether you look at AI cooperation, that's another area that China's forging ahead and reflecting that in the UN system. And of course, another facility where it's put 10 million US dollars on the line. That's not huge, but that's also pretty meaningful. So China has been systematically, very steadily, working the UN system to its advantage, so much so that today I would say it is really a very, very prominent player across the United Nations system. Whether we can work with them, that's the trillion-dollar question, because they work in a very different way. But one last point, I think the global governance initiatives that they are sort of putting forward, the Global Development Initiative, the Global Civilization Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, they are very real, because every year in the margins of UNGA, they convene these meetings. And I can tell you ma'am, that they are very well attended. Everyone who matters in the UN system is there and member states are there. So basically,
Professor
Chinese solutions to global challenges.
Professor Rajamohan, you want to add something? No? Vikram.
Thank you, Vikram Behil. I must say, you talked about, Mr. Joshi, you talked about how energy is being played in the past and present. There's another area that today is going under the radar, and I want to raise that as a question, and that's AI and defense to all the panelists. 5% of GDP of all NATO countries is upped from 2 to 5, and that's a huge amount of money, trillions of dollars that's going into defense. A lot of it is going under the radar to AI. A lot of other countries are also, China included, are investing great amounts of money into artificial intelligence, which will go into two areas really. One is hard weaponry, and we've seen that happen with drones and various automated warfare systems. And then the softer side, which will be influence and information wars. Big data is already available to many countries around the world. Are we somehow missing that? And what are your views on that?
Mr. Joshi, ask you by name, then all of you can really comment.
A tough question. It's a tough question because India has been a late entrant into the game, and that's happened in all cutting-edge technologies. There are now a lot of investments coming in, and private companies have been actually upping the ante because they realize that this is what is going to have the next wave of production, expansion is going to happen in this area. So in the last few years, yes, a lot of interest has been generated. Indian companies have done one clever thing. What they've done is they know that developing the R&D initially is going to be tough because they didn't have the base to start with. So a lot of them have gone about acquiring companies which have some substantive patents in some of these technologies. So it's a very, very rapidly developing game. And interestingly, see, the Indian IT sector also needs to up its ante on this because so far they have been living under the kind of outsourcing patterns of growth, of revenue growth, which will not last very long. And we've very clearly seen the largest hit which the H1B impact has had is on the outsourcing platforms. And they are going to be, they are the ones which are most worried. You've seen what's been happening to the share values. So they also need to fundamentally transform. They're going to be looking at information technology and be ready for the next leap. So it's a challenge. The challenge also is much larger for India. India, we talked about China-India collaboration. Is it possible? Actually, at the industrial level, that collaboration is happening. It's not that it is not happening. China remains India's after the US, and sometimes it is number one, sometimes it's number two. It's the largest trading partner. And a lot of that trade now has to do with, if you start talking of Apple iPhones, which India makes, they would not be made without China. And so goes on for a lot of other things. If you want to expand in solar, get into module manufacturing, everything else, initially, yes, we will be leaning a lot on China. So the India-China collaboration in these sectors is in many ways inevitable. It is going to happen because there are no substitutes. And the substitutes which are there are too high cost, unaffordable. So it makes no sense to go into them. So under the radar, yes, a lot is happening between India and China also in these sectors. Madam is gone, she's not here. So true with AI too. Let's see where we go.